I realize it's a little bit of a cold start. You're going to live during difficult times. Of all the things that you need to know, why would you need to know so much about foolishness?
So that you can be aware of it.
Okay.
Compare yourself to it.
Okay. I'm sorry.
One of the most tempting times to be foolish.
Very good. One of the most easy times to be foolish. Was there another hand? The Bible has a lot to say about foolishness. The New Testament, the Old Testament, and everywhere in between. Jesus has a lot to say about foolishness. Here's just a few reasons that we could touch on as to why this is so important for us to be able to live during dark times. And again, just a few reasons, but first of all, we're never going to make it to eternity. If you go back to chapter 2 in the 13th verse, he makes this statement, which I have to admit, I couldn't understand it very well up until now, much better. Quote, "And I realize there's an advantage to wisdom over folly, like the advantage of light over darkness. The wise man has his eyes in his head, but the fool walks in darkness." We're going to get a really good picture of what that walking in darkness is like. Secondly, there's two kinds of readers we would suggest to Ecclesiastes. And the first reader, which we discussed some, this has been myself certainly, probably many of you others, says, well, this is a depressing book, and walks away. And that would be a foolish thing to do. The second reader would say that the message of the book is very depressing, but why? Wait a minute. I've been living my life for the wrong things, trying to search fulfillment in the wrong things, trying to control, manipulate my life. I need to stop doing that and start living life in light of eternity. That would be the wise man. Don't make the mistake of thinking that this wouldn't happen to you, which I have often done. It's easy to surround ourselves with quote-unquote religious things. I can hang all the pictures of verses on the wall in my office. You know, we can come together here, but yet I can still live for complete vanity, but I might think that I'll somehow be okay. I won't. We can't play this game of vanity. So the question is, are we willing to submit to the preacher's goading in order to hang our life on a firm nail? And that comes from the 12th chapter. The words of the wise are like goads, which is a tool to guide and poke and prod. It's painful, an animal, to go the right direction that it needs to go. Otherwise, it may go off a cliff or run into a predator, something that would take its life. Are we willing to submit to this? And these are just important keys as we get into this. So we're going to be picking up in verse 13, which is where we left off last class. I'm going to go ahead and read 13 to the end of this chapter and then open it up here. We're going to see some truths about wisdom from a simple story. I'm going to ask you what you've seen like we usually do. So verse 13. I have observed that this also is wisdom under the sun, and it is significant to me. There was a small city with few men in it. A great king came against it, surrounded it, and built large siege works against it. Now a poor wise man was found in the city, and he delivered the city by his wisdom. Yet no one remembered that poor man, and I said, wisdom is better than strength. But the wisdom of the poor man is despised, and his words are not heeded. The calm words of the wise are heeded more than the shouts of a ruler over fools. Wisdom is better than weapons of war, but one sinner can destroy much good. What do you see in that? What stands out to you? Yes?
I was gonna say, earlier, you think about foolishness and contrast it against what you just read. I mean, foolishness, it's a deceiver, and there's a certain danger to it. And I think you see that in these verses, that if you're not wise, that by being wise, you can avoid that deceitfulness and being deceived, and the danger, the risk associated with it.
Okay. Good. What do you see in this simple little story that he gives? He says it's very significant, which I fly right over it. Great king comes against a city. They're doomed, but there's one little poor wise man that saves them. Yes.
I think there's an assumption that even the king is wise because he is convinced by this poor man, and the poor man's city is not one that recognizes wisdom as valuable. They recognize poverty, and as that as a negative thing. But we're seeing that it doesn't matter, or we're seeing the great value in saving others is wisdom, and it's not in necessarily, well, that's what's being magnified in this text.
Okay. Good. There is great value in wisdom. But, as was mentioned by Dave, the man was poor. Even though he was wise, wisdom was forgotten. And wisdom is forgotten in our world. What else did you see? What other takeaways? We're looking for truths about wisdom. Yes.
Well, what Dave just said made me think, I think a lot of times we want to dismiss someone who's maybe not monetarily wealthy or isn't like the greatest person in the world, and think that they don't have any wisdom, and then say, oh, well, because that person is wealthy or because that person has all this power, like in the story, the king, he must possess all the wisdom. And so, sometimes we incorrectly dismiss what really is wise just because of outside appearances or outside circumstances. And again, that's by, we're assessing those circumstances by the world's standards also.
Okay. Look closely at verse 16. The preacher concludes from this story saying to himself, wisdom is better than strength. Now, that's the opposite of what I think. That's the opposite of what the world says, right? There's strength in numbers, might, power. How many nukes will we have? How many this? How much? What's our resources? No. Wisdom is better than strength. But the wisdom of the poor man was despised. We don't know specifically how that was packaged. We just know that it was despised. And that has always been true throughout the Bible and throughout history. And then what do you see in verses 17 and 18? Let me read, here's another translation, verse 17. The words of the wise heard in quiet are better than the shouting of the ruler over fools.
It seems there's a strategy that the wise man uses, or those who have wisdom use, and it's not one that promotes the message necessarily, but is very acute, perhaps to one single person that can make the changes, that has that might.
Okay? Yes.
They have something about wisdom is, like,
It's all right.
maybe I'll practice it.
Yeah, take a second.
I'm thinking like the shouting of a fool, you hear it, and sometimes, part of learning to become wise is learning how to not speak or to say it at the right time, and quietly and
Absolutely. Think of any political candidate that you've ever heard of. They're all shouting. They're all shouting what they know, what they believe, and nobody's standing up and shouting the voice of reason because it's not popular. It never has been and it never will be. The words of the wise heard in quiet are better than the shouting of ruler among fools. Another truth about wisdom. Wisdom is never going to be popular. It is not going to make it on prime time. It just isn't. It's not going to be the majority consensus. Maybe all the commentaries are not going to agree on it, or all the biblical scholars, or whatever. And then the last statement, verse 18. What do you see here? Somebody that maybe hasn't spoken up yet. Yes?
You see that the wise man brought wisdom and it saved life, rather than the weapons of war that typically take it. I think the really strange thing, though, is that no one remembered him for it, though, which is, I think, the saddest part of the story, that he was a life saver and he was a rescuer, and his words clearly brought about good things, but they loved the outcome, but didn't really care too much to love the person who brought it about.
Absolutely. Wisdom is better than weapons of war, but one sinner can destroy much good. That's a chilling statement, and powerful yet true. It's going to lead us into this entire next chapter and set things up. One sinner can destroy much good. We can have the greatest thing going, the best group of people. We can have a wonderful church, but one sinful deed, person, heart, thought, action can destroy so much. Such a powerful, powerful reminder for us. Yes, wisdom is these things, but yet one sinner can destroy so much good. All right, let's turn the page here to chapter 10. This is going to get us into, now he's going to paint the spiritual picture for us on the wall. We're going to get a portrait of what a fool is like. And we're going to take about 6 minutes as we go through this. I want you guys read through it, mark up any question that you have, anything that sticks out. Remember the context of what we're looking at. We're looking at the portrait of a foolishness. He's going to show that from many different angles, even though sometimes something may not seem like it fits in the context. We want to look at it at least that way. So let's do that. Let's take about 6 minutes here till about 9:20. Yes. All of chapter 10. Thank you. Go about 9:25. Look for common themes and threads. What kind of fool is he describing? Things like that. If you have a question about something, make sure to save that. That is going to help the class. About another 2 minutes. Just one more minute. Okay, let's stop right there. Big, long text here. Let's do what we typically do. Let's open it up and ask what everyone saw, and then we'll go through it together. So what did you see? Anything stick out to you? Yes?
This seemed maybe a little bit of an opposite view of what we've read previously, where this to me does sound like good justice that I enjoy, or that I would predict that the things that the fool does are going to bring him to his demise, and the things that the wise man does are going to build him up. Specifically in verses like 1 through 15, If you dig a pit, you're going to fall into it. Or on the opposite side, the wise man's mouth will win him favor. So maybe a little bit more hopeful of a message than what we might have read previously.
Good observation, Ryan. But we already know from what we've learned, we can't bank our hopes on that because, like we talked about last class, there's different reasons that the Bible gives for why events happen. Yes, Proverbs teaches very strongly that some events are a result of our own actions. But Ecclesiastes teaches, chapter 9, time and chance happen to everyone. That's not fair. Good things happen to bad people. Bad things happen to good people. But you are right. We do see that here. Very good thought. What about some others?
Verse 7 through 11 are very hard for me to understand. It just doesn't really make a lot of sense to me.
I would sure hope so, because I've worked on this for years. I'd be really disappointed if everybody could just smoke right through this. Great. Can we get to those here in just a few minutes? Great. Yes?
Verse 1, what I think about is if you let sin in one area, you could ruin everything, over your entire life. And you don't realize that. And before you know it, you just have a lot of consequences for our actions.
Excellent. Excellent. This verse heads up the entire chapter, picking up from the last chapter. We're going to get into that, but I don't want to overlook anybody that has any other great thoughts or questions on this chapter. If you do, at any time, yes.
The foolishness here seems like it's coupled with dim-wittedness too, plus with pure evil. It's just not tradition I had.
What do you mean by dim-wittedness?
It doesn't help if you're not paying attention going through life. You can't help yourself. And there are bear traps everywhere to step in. Fool facing no mind.
All right. We'll just quote chapter 2, verse 11 one more time. The fool walks in darkness. That's exactly what you're saying. Wisdom is better than that. We don't want to go through life like that, by the way. We do not want to go through life like that. Jesus is very clear. The wise man builds his house on a rock. The fool builds his house on the sand. I know we made that into a cute kid song. I use it too. He's not saying, as long as you are church-going, believing, I believe in Jesus, you're on the rock. There's more to it than that. Actually, a lot more to it than that. And he's building off of Koheleth's lessons that have been taught some long time in the past. Was there another hand that I missed? Verse 1, we use this phrase, fly in the ointment. But we're typically meaning that everything went according to plan except there was one little hiccup. The preacher says, however, this fly is no minor thing. As a matter of fact, it doesn't matter how much wisdom or honor you or I may have, just a little bit of foolishness is all it takes to destroy that. We don't like to think that way, do we? I do not like to think that way. We like to think of life like a balance sheet. For you accountants, as long as we have more good and not as much bad, we'll balance it out. The preacher says it doesn't work that way. Did you have your hand up, Rod?
Yeah. I don't turn back to the old King James very often to talk about the word Jews. I think, the ESV or the New American Standard in most instances is probably closer to our language. And yet, in this verse, chapter 10 and verse 1, I appreciate what the old King James says instead of perfumer. It uses the word, instead of perfumer, apothecary. I had it here on my phone just a minute ago. The old King James says, dead flies cause the ointment of the apothecary to send forth a stinking savor. Now, apothecary, we would think of as a pharmacist. And it could be, perfumer is perfectly fine also. The Hebrew word there literally compounds. But if you think about this as perhaps a pharmacist, I think the implication or the magnitude of the folly grows somewhat. This isn't just perfume that's been spoiled. This might be medicine that we were going to give somebody to make them better that is now spoiled. And that carries, to me, a little bit more, weight. That's a good word. And I can't help but liking the way it rolls off my tongue a little bit better also. The ointment of the apothecary, I like that.
By the way, I don't know if you noticed, he now turns this fine ointment phrase backwards. Remember from chapter 7, the fine ointment was used to picture wealth. And in that case, he said, a good name is better than that. Now he's flipped it. And the fine ointment is our lives. One little dead fly ruins the whole thing. Powerful, powerful. Excellent observation. Can you identify the fly in the ointment in the lives of a couple of examples here? I'll just mention them. I'm sure you guys can remember. How about King David? What was the fly in the ointment of his life?
Bathsheba.
One little bitty woman wrecked his entire life. How about Samson? What was the fly in the ointment?
Oh, I said it, Delilah.
Women.
Yeah, our women in general.
Yeah, mommy and daddy never held him back. Oh, we'll get him for you. Sure, no problem. Look what that did to the man. How about the fly in the ointment and the old prophet and the man of God? Man of God goes before the most powerful person in the world, delivers one of the hardest messages he can. King says, kill him. His hand shrivels. He changes his mind. The man of God goes his way. What happens?
The old prophet lied to him and believed the lie.
Well, yeah, and I was gonna say, he was kind of like lazy or not in a hurry to finish, God's command.
Yeah. Oh, stay for dinner. Okay, I'll do that. Yeah. Absolutely. One little bitty thing cost him everything. How about Ananias and Sapphira? They were doing well up until
Their dishonesty about their giving.
yeah, their worship was unholy. How about King Jehoshaphat? What's the fly in the ointment of his life? He had a buddy that he just loved to hang out with. He was a great time. What was his name? BFFs. Ahab, one of the most wicked people. That did not go well for Jehoshaphat. That did not go well for his family or for his children. Next thing you see, his son marrying Ahab's daughter. Not good. All throughout Scripture. And we see this in our lives. Okay. Verse 2 and 3. What do you see here? What do you see about the fool's heart in these two verses? So we've seen just a little bit of foolishness. Now he's going to show us the fool's heart. Yes. Oh, Morgan first.
In verse 3, it seems like his actions show his foolishness.
Okay.
Walking along the way, he even shows it to everyone watching.
Okay.
I think Dave said earlier, I don't really see like a pure evil motive right here. It's just kind of a bumbling around. I remember when Kevin did the Proverbs, he had a slide slide up that said like what the fool represented, and it maybe not always as someone who is scheming these great plans of evil. It might just be a lack of care or a lack of diligence that brings about the foolishness.
This helped me. Here's another way to look at this. Wise man's heart goes to the right, but a fool's heart to the left. We could just say, the fool, something just isn't right about them. They're just their mind is just out of whack. And that's because they're constantly thinking and acting based on their own desires, feelings, and passions. And they're not thinking about the consequences of those things. They're just trying to figure out how much they can get away with in the short term. And verse 3 reinforces this idea. I kind of wonder, maybe if Koheleth lived in our day, if he would say verse 3 differently. Even when a fool drives down the road, his heart lacks sense, and he shows everyone he's a fool. Which is right in my face. Hits me. Good. Verses 4 through 7. What do you see? How are we to handle when a fool is ruling over us?
Is it like a fool who leads you or is ruling over you destroys the rest?
Just what?
It destroys rest and calmness?
I like the NLT paraphrased Bible's rendering of verse 4 and verse 6. If your boss is angry with you, don't quit. A quiet spirit can overcome even great mistakes. So, steadying yourself before a fool, calmness can lay great offenses to rest. Does that kind of help? Verse 6 NLT, kings and rulers make a grave mistake when they give great authority to foolish people and low positions to men of great worth. You look like you were going to say something.
Try not to be the fool.
Oh. Me too.
Hey, Mike,
Yes.
verse 4 made me think of Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah before King Nebuchadnezzar.
Excellent.
And he's demanding them
Yeah.
to bow down and worship an idol. And they're calmly
Excellent.
identifying that even if we die, we're not going to do it.
Excellent. Perfect example. O King, may you live forever. Yeah. You go throw us in that fire. We're going to keep serving the Lord. Outstanding example. How about verses 8, 9, and 10? This is kind of getting to what you were talking about earlier, Morgan, and I'm really thankful because they confused me to death. But it's helpful. Someone came along after all the years and put this in the context of what we're discussing. And it popped for me. Just look at these and say, that's just like the fool. That's just like how the fool does things. Ryan had mentioned this already. The fool is crashing through life, one painful experience at a time, one right after the other, but they never learn from them. They evidently never wake up and realize and see that the reasons that things are so hard is because of their own foolishness. Why is my life so hard, asked the fool. Instead of sharpening their axe, they just keep going their own way, exerting themselves more and more. Of course, verse 10 is beautiful. In contrast to living that way, however, the advantage of wisdom is it brings success. Of course, we are not looking at success in a worldly standpoint, in a spiritual standpoint. Wisdom brings success. Does that help at all? Does anybody have any thoughts to add to that or questions? Yeah.
Well, I don't know this to add to that, but it
excellent. That's that picture of the Acts. The commentaries were going nuts over that, but in the context, it's right there. This is the purpose of Koheleth, as is spoken in chapter 12. The words of the wise are like goads. We need this. We need this. If we go along our own way, there's no telling what kind of mess we're going to end ourselves up in. 11 through 14. What do you see here? This is another tricky part, to me at least, Morgan, so just lost my marbles over this for many years, but it's actually not that bad. One thought here. 11 through 14, what's he discussing? Now how's the fool getting himself in trouble?
He's running his mouth.
His words. If there was one way that you could identify the fool and his foolishness, perhaps more than all others, the Bible would consistently speak about the tongue. Please notice the progression of thought and the extremely practical wisdom that the preacher gives here. Verse 11, control your tongue. Simple point. A fool's mouth gets them in a lot of trouble. Here's just a few other texts from the Bible about the danger of the tongue. Proverbs 18:21, death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it will eat its fruits. I don't have time to read. I'm just going to paraphrase from James. If anyone doesn't stumble in what he says, he's a mature man who is able to control his entire body. The tongue is a small part of the body. It boasts great things. Consider how large a fire, a small forest, a small fire ignites, and the tongue is a fire. The tongue, a world of unrighteousness, placed among the parts of our body. It pollutes the whole body and sets the course of life on fire and is set on fire by hell. No man can tame the tongue. Wow. This is the picture. Verse 12, in contrast to this, the words of the wise are gracious. Such a simple and beautiful thought. Here's Proverbs 12 and verse 18. There's one who speaks rashly like a piercing sword, but the tongue of the wise brings healing. And then verse 13, and we're all guilty of this, speaking before we think. Here's the great danger in speaking many words. It's the simple fact that we're far less likely to speak something foolish or hurtful or arrogant if we speak 10 words instead of 100. If you think about it, 100 words takes a lot to charm, to go through, filter. If you speak 10, you can get those down easier. And that's the great danger. I can't remember which chapter it was in earlier in Ecclesiastes, but a fool is known, or many words mark the speech of a fool. I think it was in chapter 5 in regards to worship before God. So easy to do and dangerous. Yes, Ian.
Satan is the father of lies.
Dangerous tongue. I can't believe we're out of time, and I thought we were going to run out of, I don't know. We're not done with chapter 10, and I apologize for that. Ryan is going to pick up chapter 11 and 12. I really appreciate this class. I'm very thankful for all of you having to put up through this. Don't know how it was, but it's an amazing book. And I hope you get the chance to read it with a friend, maybe someone that doesn't read the Bible. It's a wonderful, wonderful introduction to the Bible. Thank you.